Hello students, after the CSF cerebrospinal fluid, one of the important short note from the brain is the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is one of the part of the brainstem, and brainstem consists of medulla oblongata, pons and midbrain. So medulla is lower part of the brainstem extending from the lower border of the pons to a plane just about to the first cervical nerve, where it is continuous with the spinal cord. We have seen, you already studied the cerebellum, medulla and pons, and below the spinal cord is there. So it lies anterior part of the posterior cranial fossa, extending down from the foramina magnum. Anteriorly, it is related with the clevus and meninges. Posteriorly to the vallicula of the cerebellum, along with other parts of the hindbrain, the medulla occupies the infratensional space. Now the external features of the medulla. The external features of the medulla consist of divided into right and left walls by the anterior and posterior median fissures. Each half of the medulla oblongata further divided into anterior, lateral and posterior regions by the anterolateral and posterolateral sulci, one sulcus and floral sulci. The anterior region is in the form of a longitudinal elevation called as a pyramid. The pyramid is made up of the corticospinal fibers in the lower part of the medulla. Many fibers of the right and left pyramids cross the midline, forming the pyramidal decussation. Some fibers run transversely across upper part of the pyramid. These are anterior external arcuate fibers. The upper part of the lateral region shows an oval elevation called as a olive. It is produced by an underlying mass of a grey matter called as the inferior olivary nucleus. A bundle of fibers curving around lower edge of the olive is circumolivary bundle. The rootlet of the hypoglossal nerve emerge from the anterior lateral circus between the pyramid and the olive. The rootlets of the 9th and 10th nerves, 9th is glossopharyngeal and 10th is the vagus nerve, the cranial part of the accessory nerve, emerge through the posterolateral fissure behind the olive. Now, the posterolateral regions lies between the posterolateral sulcus and the posterior median fissure. The upper part of the region is marked by a V-shaped depression, which is lower part of the floor of the fourth ventricle. Below the floor, we see three longitudinal elevations from medial to the lateral side. These are the fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cutaneous and inferior cerebellar peduncle. The upper ends of the fasciculus gracilis and the cuneatus, not cutaneous, cuneatus expand to form the gracile and cunei tubercles. The tubercles are formed underlying masses of a grey matter called the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. In the lower part of the medulla, there is another elevation called as a tuber cinereum lateral to the fasciculus cuneatus. It is produced by a mass of a grey matter called the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. The medulla is divided into two parts. The lower part, closed part with a central canal, and upper open part where central canal opens out in the form of a fourth ventricle above. Then the internal structure of the medulla oblongata. What does internally it consist of? First one, The internal structure of a medulla can be studied conveniently by examining transverse section. A transverse section through the three levels. The first level is the transverse section through the lower part of the medulla oblongata passing through the pyramidal decussation. It resembles a transverse section of a spinal cord in having the same three funiculi and the same tracts. We have to identify the following structures. First of all, white matter. The pyramids are anteriorly. In the white matter, the decussations of the pyramidal tract forms the most important feature of the medulla. At this level, the fibers of each pyramid run backwards and laterally to reach the lateral white column of the spinal cord, where they form the lateral corticospinal tract. The fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus pineatus occupy the broad posterior white column. Now, the other feature of the white matter are similar to those of the spinal cord. The other features. Now, second, the gray matter. The gray matter decussating pyramidal fibers separate the anterior horn from the central gray matter. The separated anterior horn forms spinal nucleus of the accessory nerve, the supraspinal nucleus for motor fibers of the first cervical nerve. Now the central gray matter with the central canal is pushed backwards. The nucleus gracilis and the nucleus pineatus are continuous with the central gray matter. Laterally, central gray matter is continuous with the nucleus of spinal tract and trigeminal nerve, that is fifth cranial nerve. A bundle of fibers overlying the nucleus forms the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve. Now the second level, this is at the level of the passing through the pyramidal decussation level. Now the second, you can study medulla oblongata at the second level, that is transverse section through the middle of the, exactly at the mid of the medulla oblongata, that is through sensory decussations. You have to identify the structures in the middle part. The structures that finds in the middle part is the nucleus of the solitary tract, then the nucleus gracilis, nucleus pineatus, nucleus of the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, lateral spinothalamic tract, dorsal ventral spinocerebellar tracts, a pyramid, then the inferior olivary nucleus, the internal arcuate fibers, that is sensory decussation, hypoglossal nerve, and the dorsal nucleus of the vagus nerve. These things that you have to identify in the section through the mid of the medulla oblongata. Now the gray matter at this section, the gray matter, the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus pineatus are much larger and are separate from the central gray matter. The fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus pineatus end in these nuclei. Lateral to the pineate nucleus, we see the accessory pineate nucleus. The nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve is also separate from the central gray matter. The lower part of the inferior olivary nucleus is seen. The central gray matter contains following: hypoglossal nucleus, dorsal nucleus of the vagus, and nucleus of the tractus solitarius. Now the white matter in the mid. The white matter shows the nucleus gracilis pineatus gives rise to the internal arcuate fibers. These fibers cross to the opposite side where they form the pyramidian band of fibers called the medial lemniscus. The lemniscus, the body is represented with the head of the posteriorly and the feet anteriorly. The pyramidal tract lie anteriorly. The medial longitudinal bundle lies posterior to the medial lemniscus. The spinocerebellar and the lateral spinothalamic tracts and the other tracts lie in the anterolateral area in a cross section or in a transverse section of the medulla oblongata. Now we have seen the upper, middle and the lower section in the lower half. Lower half, if you take a transverse section through the lower half of the medulla, it will show following structures in the on each side. The first one is the hypoglossal nucleus, secondly vestibular nucleus, thirdly inferior cerebellar peduncle, fourth spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, medial lemniscus and lateral spinothalamic tract, inferior olivary nucleus, pyramid, arcuate nucleus, hypoglossal nerve, vagus nerve, spinocerebellar tract and rubrospinal tract, nucleus ambiguous, then the nucleus of the solitary tract and dorsal nucleus of the vagus. These are the parts in the transverse section of the lower half, through the lower half of the medulla oblongata. So you have to identify these structures in the lower half of the medulla oblongata. The transverse section will show gray matter. The gray matter, the nuclei of the several cranial nerves are seen in the floor of the fourth ventricle, that is hypoglossal nucleus, in a paramedian position, the dorsal nucleus of the vagus, lateral to the 12th nucleus, the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, ventrolateral to the dorsal nucleus of the vagus, and the inferior and medial vestibular nuclei, medial to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. The nucleus ambiguous lies deep to the reticular formation of the medulla. It gives origin to the motor fibers of the 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve. The dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei lie on the surface of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. These nuclei receive fibers of the cochlear nerve. The nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve lies in the dorsolateral part. The inferior olivary nucleus is the largest mass of the grey matter seen at this level. It is responsible for producing the elevation of the olive. Its grey matter appears like a crumpled purse. Crumpled purse. Close to the inferior olivary nucleus, these are the medial and the dorsal accessory olivary nucleus. Now, the arcuate nucleus lies anteromedial to the pyramidal tract. Now, interiorly white matter. The white matter of the medulla oblongata consists of, in the lower part, it shows the inferior cerebellar peduncle occupies posterolateral parts, lateral to the fourth ventricle. Oliocerebellar tract, which is we have not seen in the diagram, or I have not read in the diagram, that is seen prominently in the actual section. The fibers emerge at the hilum of the inferior olivary nucleus and pass to the opposite inferior cerebellar peduncle on their way to the opposite half of the cerebellum. The stria medullaris are seen in the floor of the fourth ventricle. You have to identify the various tracts ascending from the spinal cord. They lie in the anterolateral part of the medulla. Now, the applied anatomy of the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, the main important applied anatomy points of the medulla oblongata is the vital centers, respiratory and vasomotor centers are situated in the lower part of the fourth ventricle formed by the medulla. An injury to the medulla therefore usually fatal, because as all of you know, the respiration and urination, These are the two voluntary as well as involuntary functions in our body, and the respiratory centers consist of the inspiratory center, expiratory center, respiratory neuron pool, and one center is there in the hypothalamus that controls the respiration. That is very important. If these two centers are injured, it is dangerous for the life if they are injured at the level of the medulla oblongata. Secondly, the bulbar paralysis may be the acute characterized by the paralysis of the muscles supplied by the last four cranial nerves, that is glossopharyngeal, vagus, then the hypoglossal nerve and accessory nerve. These nerves may get affected by this bulbar paralysis that leads to the paralysis of the voluntary muscles. Paralysis of the respiratory and vasomotor centers are dangerous for the life. Then the pseudobulbar palsy. Pseudobulbar palsy is a supranuclear type of the paralysis of the bulbar muscles as a result of the cerebral arteriosclerosis, that is enlargement or thickening of the wall of the artery. Arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis, these are the same terms in which the lumen become narrow and sufficient amount of blood do not flow, and in another condition the walls become thick of the arteries. Arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis. In the arteriosclerosis the lumen become small. The common vascular lesions involving the medulla are thrombosis of a posterior inferior cerebellar artery and thrombosis of the cerebral artery. The two lesions cause lateral and medial medullary syndromes respectively. If these vascular lesions are there in the way of the arteries, for example cerebellar artery, that is one of the branch of the internal carotid artery, cerebellar artery, deriving from the circle of Willis, as all of you know, that leads to a dangerous condition for the act of especially the voluntary muscle paralysis. If there is a injury or lesions to the cerebral centers that supplies to the particular muscles, they become paralyzed, and if the centers are being injured or they may be get compressed, there may be paralysis of these respiratory muscles. So medulla plays an important role because the respiratory centers are situated in the medulla. So that is all about medulla oblongata. You have to draw two important diagrams. One of the structure of the medulla, structure of the brainstem includes the medulla oblongata. Four diagrams there are total 4 diagrams in the medulla oblongata. One diagram is of a surface features of the brainstem seen from the front. Another is the surface feature of the brainstem seen from behind, and transverse section through the lower part of the medulla, that is at the level of the pyramidal decussation. Then the transverse section through the medulla at the level of the sensory decussation, and transverse section of the medulla oblongata at the level of the olive. So totally there are 5 diagrams. This is one of the interested note to write, especially skeletal muscle. It controls the skeletal muscles and muscles of the respiration, because that respiration, inspiration and expiration. Both the centers are situated in this brainstem called as a medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. Then some of the in this lecture we have seen the two short notes in the same lecture. So in the medulla oblongata, the features, 2 marks questions are the what are the main important features of the medulla oblongata. Then the what give any two clinical important points of the medulla oblongata and what are the relations of the medulla. These are the probable 3 questions from the medulla oblongata. Then this from the that cerebrospinal fluid we have seen CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid. In the cerebrospinal fluid, what is the how much amount of the CSF that is produced in 1 hour? What is the amount of the CSF produced in 24 hours? And another question, what are you need two constituents of the CSF? What is the pH of CSF? What is the specific gravity of the CSF? Then the important question from the regarding the CSF is the what are the where from the CSF is produced exactly from the 4th ventricle. That is, and name the foramen CSF produced in the lateral ventricle. From the lateral ventricle, name the structure from where lateral ventricle the CSF comes into the 3rd ventricle, and name the structure from where it enters into the 4th ventricle. And what is the structure from the 4th ventricle that it reach to the subarachnoid space. So all of these 4 questions are important. Name what is the amount of the fluid, CSF fluid. What is the amount of the fluid that is produced in 24 hours of the CSF? 24 hours, it is 5000 5 liters CSF तैयार होता है. Then the as all of you know, CSF is produced in the lateral ventricles production of the CSF. CSF for your general knowledge point of view, बाकी बॉडी के सभी सिस्टम में लिम्प रहता है, लिम्पैटिक. वैसा सेंट्रल नर्वस सिस्टम को लिम्पैटिक नहीं रहता है, उसके जगह पे सेरेब्रोस्पाइनल फ्लूइड रहता है उसकी जगह. तो CSF, it is produced in the choroid plexuses of the lateral ventricles and less amount in the choroid plexuses, and possibly it is formed in the capillaries and of the brain and spinal cord. Total quantity 150 ml in 1 hour, 200 ml total quantity 150 at a time, total CSF, or within 1 hour it is 200 ml, 150 ml, and within 24 hours it is 5000 ml तैयार होता है, absorb होता है. So definitely there is some system. And as all of you know, the applied anatomy, if CSF is not absorbed, if it is not produced, then there is a dryness. A number of symptoms will be produced. तैयारी नहीं हो रहा तो क्या करेगा? तो number of symptoms. There will be severe symptoms in the central nervous system, and if it is produced and if it is not absorbed, it will also produce a hydrocephalus. Amount of the CSF increases in the brain cavities, especially in the ventricles and in subarachnoid space. So that is called as a hydrocephalus. Then if excessive CSF is produced and not absorbed, then the intracranial pressure will get increased, and that clinical condition is can be diagnosed and is dangerous for the life. Especially hydrocephalus is in the childhood. The age that affect the hydrocephalus is in the childhood mainly. Okay, so we go through two short notes. One is the CSF and another is the medulla oblongata. These are the two short notes. So deliberately I have taken these two short notes in one lecture, 30 minutes. The आधा lecture एक एक का और उसके probable 2 marks question. So you may note down the diagrams, you can practice the diagram, and you can write it better. Only the thing is that medulla oblongata has a huge 3 to 4 diagrams are there in the medulla oblongata. In CSF there are only 2 diagrams. One full diagram that is of the subarachnoid space. Then the ventricles, you have to show in blue color the CSF and whole brain. And in the medulla oblongata there are 4 diagrams. You can write 2 to 3 clinical anatomy important sequence. Clinical anatomy important points. So again request to all of you to practice these two. Most probable CSF, many times it is asked, medulla oblongata is many times asked as a short note from anatomy paper first, question number 2.